everybody. Welcome to our Ayurveda talk. I am Marie, an Ayurvedic health practitioner, here to talk to you tonight about urinary bladder weakness. Okay, now, it can happen to anyone, but it typically happens to women, and especially if you've had children. But I want to tell you some of the other causes that can cause weakness in the urinary tract and bladder. There are several different imbalances that can cause problems with the tissue breaking down. So we're going to look at some of those causes. They can be from food. So you're eating the wrong kinds of foods. So what foods would they be? It would be too much sweet, too much salt, too many sour type of foods, also hard to digest foods, slimy foods, cold foods. Remember, in Ayurveda, we never want to eat cold. So you don't eat cold, period. Raw grains, also domesticated and aquatic animal meats can cause problems and weaken the tissues in the urinary tract and bladder. So, interesting. Also, liquids. There are certain liquids that are more prone to weakening these tissues. And one of those would be beer, sugarcane juice, molasses, and milk. They weaken the tissue. They cause an imbalance and weaken the tissue. Also, lifestyle can cause problems, being too sedentary, sleeping too much, and sleeping while you sit. Sleeping while you sit. So falling asleep seated, not a good idea. Causes weakness in the urinary tract and urinary tract diseases, according to Ayurveda. Also, some of the other things that cause an increase of kapha, in other words, too much fat and urine, that can also cause an imbalance. So remember, we're talking about the elements. And when I say vata, pitta, kapha, I'm talking about how Ayurveda has categorized the elements. So vata is ether and air, fire, a little bit of water is pitta, mostly fire for pitta. And then kapha is water and earth. Now, we are made up of all of these elements, and everything we do, the environment gets dominated by the elements. The food we eat have certain elements that are dominating them. And what happens is if we're living in a way that is not balancing for our particular constitution, it causes an imbalance of these different elements. And we break it down into dosha imbalances. So that's typically how you'll hear me talk. And if you're not quite sure what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the doshas, I'm really just talking about the elements. And ether and air, they behave very similarly. That's why they're lumped together and called vata. Okay? Fire is unique on its own. It's the only element that is hot. Okay? And water and earth also behave very similarly. That's why they are lumped together and create the dosha called kapha. Okay, now, so there are 24 forms of this disease, urinary diseases. So you're not being able to go, right? And 4 are due to vata, 6 are from pitta, and 10 are caused by kapha. The main causes of these diseases are fat and urine and a kapha buildup. Kapha excess, right? We're moving towards spring. That's when we're heading into kapha season. So you can have a kapha buildup. It can start being acute, you might start feeling it to be accumulated. All right, how does it develop? So when you have an excess of kapha, it overflows into the body channels and mixes with the tissues, specifically the lymph, the muscle, and the plasma, and also can be found in the sweat, right? So you'll start feeling it in your sweat. this weakens the tissues, and then they move into the urinary system and causes 10 types of kapha urinary diseases. Okay. Now, if we were dealing with the fire element, pitta is your main dosha. It's because there is aggravated pitta. There's too much heat being brought in through your food, through your lifestyle, through everything you're doing. It's increasing heat, and then blood gets vitiated, and it moves into the bladder. And then the waters that, because it's heat, what happens with heat? It dehydrates. So it's dehydrating in the urinary tract system and it depletes. Okay. So if there's fat and muscle and plasma that are already weak and depleted, when you have pitta that shows up, it causes even more of an excess, and then it produces the excess then is in the blood, and it produces what they call the 6 types of urinary diseases caused by pitta. Now, vata is also weakening of the bladder, and it's drawing depleted tissues into the bladder. So vata is usually a depletion of ojas. Also in the bones, it'll show up, so the marrow and the lymph. And when there's a problem with vata, again, you're gonna have a dryness. It starts drying out the tissues. It literally dries out the urine right at the mouth of the bladder, and then you start having weakening of the tissues. It can be very painful. Okay, so what does it mean? Like in Ayurveda, we're always wanting to get to the root cause. What is the root cause of why you might have issues with your urinary tract and bladder? So you got to look at your diet, your lifestyle, all of that is important. And then you also have to look at what your environment is. If you're living in a dry climate, like where we live, you have to take that into consideration. We have to hydrate more here where we live. When we're in a higher altitude in the mountains, it's dry and you're in a high altitude. So you have to think about that. So having healthy fats is going to be important unless you're dealing with those kapha imbalances. So it is much more complex than people realize. And I would definitely suggest that you work with an Ayurvedic practitioner if you're dealing with urinary tract issues. And like I said, women tend to be the ones that have those issues, especially if you've had children. Now, in the West, a lot of women, when the tissues in the bladder weaken and the urinary tract weaken, it'll start collapsing. And then there is a technique, a surgery technique, where they go out and it's like a hammock, and it lifts up the bladder. And it's I used to work with a OBGYN here in town, and that particular surgery's come a long way. So it's quite effective in helping women so that they're not having leakage. So you walk around, and when your tissues get weak, you can't hold anything. You can't, everything just starts leaking, and then you're going to end up having to wear pads and diapers and things like that. So there are postures that you could do to strengthen the muscles and the tissues. But if you're not eating in a way, or you're having a lifestyle that is depleting from the inside out, then those exercises may not be that effective. So I would definitely get to the bottom of your urinary tract issues and look at what your diet and your lifestyle is, because that's the contributor. You want to get to the root cause. Why is this happening? And by the way, these diseases, urinary diseases, lead to diabetes. So there is one of the causes of diabetes. So you got to look at that as well. So you could get blood work done and find out where you are as far as, are you at the beginning of being diabetic? And if so, you got to really change your diet and your lifestyle. Okay, so that's just, it's a much more complicated topic, but for tonight, that's the gist. And if you are having these issues, reach out to me. Let's get you on track. Let's get to the root cause of why you might have bladder or urinary tract issues and get those tissues strengthened through your diet and your lifestyle.